As much as we wanted to, we had an opportunity last game. We had an opportunity definitely tonight to win the game. And I think we're definitely confident about, where we are.
On June 13th, 2026, in the early hours before sunrise, James Harden's night in Houston ended under flashing red and blue lights. Around 3:40 a.m. in downtown Houston, Texas, officers conducted a traffic stop that quickly escalated into a high-profile arrest involving one of the NBA's most recognizable names. However, this was the latest episode in a long saga. So when the arrest story broke, it didn't land in isolation. Rumors now suggest that James Harden's sentence is final. But what is the reality? Well, to make any sense of it all, we must travel 6 years back in time. Rockets exit and forced trade reputation. By the time the 2020 offseason began, James Harden was already one of the most accomplished offensive players in modern NBA history, and Houston had spent nearly a decade built entirely around him. Since arriving in a 2012 trade from the Oklahoma City Thunder, he had transformed into the Rockets' central system, winning 3 scoring titles, earning the 2018 NBA Most Valuable Player award, and routinely averaging above 30 points per game across multiple seasons. Despite that individual dominance, Houston never reached the NBA Finals during his tenure. The 2019 to 2020 season became the immediate breaking point in that long-running tension. Harden averaged 34.3 points per game, once again ranking among the league's scoring leaders, while Houston committed fully to an unconventional small ball approach after trading away traditional center Clint Capella. The system produced explosive offensive stretches, but also exposed structural limitations in size and defense. The Rockets ultimately fell to the Los Angeles Lakers in the Western Conference semifinals in 6 games. By the end of that series, the alignment between Harden's timeline and the franchise's direction began to fracture. The offseason that followed did not bring stability. Instead, reports emerged that Harden was evaluating his future, with Miami, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn identified as potential destinations. Unlike earlier speculative trade cycles in the NBA, this one quickly gained substance. By November and December 2020, as training camp for the 2020 to 2021 season opened, tension became the defining atmosphere around the Rockets. Harden attended camp, but his level of integration into team activities was inconsistent with the expectations of a franchise cornerstone. Media coverage described irregular participation in certain sessions, conditioning concerns, and a growing physical and operational separation between him and the rest of the roster. At the same time, Houston itself was undergoing structural change. The franchise had replaced longtime head coach Mike D'Antoni with Stephen Silas, signaling a shift in system and leadership philosophy. General Manager Daryl Morey, one of Harden's strongest organizational supporters and a key architect of the team's analytics-driven identity, had already left for Philadelphia. A superstar was still performing at an elite level, but an organization was increasingly preparing for a future that might not include him. By December 2020, that uncertainty became explicit. Harden formally communicated a desire to be traded, and the situation transitioned from internal discussion to public standoff. This whole situation unfolded in real time through media reports and league-wide speculation. As the standoff extended through training camp and early season preparation, reports out of Houston described Harden missing portions of practice activities and not consistently aligning with team schedules. The optics became increasingly influential in shaping public perception. In a professional environment, Harden's presence began to be defined as much by his partial disengagement as by the production he had already delivered for the franchise over 8 seasons. Behind the scenes, trade negotiations intensified. Multiple franchises engaged in discussions, but the Brooklyn Nets gradually emerged as the central destination. Pairing Harden with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving created a super team model centered on three elite offensive creators. For Houston, the focus shifted to long-term return, draft capital, young players, and flexibility to rebuild after nearly a decade of contending around a single superstar engine. On January the 13th, 2021, the situation reached resolution when a four-team trade involving the Rockets, Nets, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Indiana Pacers was finalized. Harden was officially traded to Brooklyn. The deal included multiple first-round draft assets and pick swaps for Houston, signaling a clear pivot from immediate contention to future-focused reconstruction. For Brooklyn, it marked the formation of one of the most talented offensive trios in league history, with expectations of immediate championship contention. The trade reshaped how Harden's entire career was interpreted. In Houston, he had functioned as a franchise-defining constant. After January 2021, his exit reframed him as part of a broader NBA shift toward player-driven mobility. Continue with this. This was later, no? But the reputational damage only got worse over time, and things got even darker from there on. Brooklyn exit and Philadelphia friction. Harden's arrival in Brooklyn in January 2021 immediately redefined expectations for the NBA landscape. He joined Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in what became one of the most talent-dense offensive trios in league history, with Brooklyn built around elite shot creation rather than traditional positional balance. In his first full stretch with the Nets, Harden averaged 24.6 points, 10.9 assists, and 8.5 rebounds per game during the 2020 to 2021 regular season, functioning less as a pure scorer and more as a primary playmaker, orchestrating the offense. Brooklyn finished second in the Eastern Conference with a 48-24 record, and the postseason felt like a formality for a championship push rather than a rebuilding phase. That expectation collapsed in the playoffs. Injuries began reshaping the roster at the worst possible time, with Kyrie Irving suffering an ankle injury in the second-round series against the Milwaukee Bucks, and Kevin Durant being forced into extreme minutes load management as the series stretched to 7 games. Harden himself was visibly limited in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals due to a hamstring injury, returning earlier than full recovery in an attempt to stabilize the team's momentum. Brooklyn eventually lost Game 7 in overtime to Milwaukee, 115-111, ending the season short of the finals. The 2021-2022 season intensified instability rather than correcting it. Harden's role shifted again as he attempted to balance scoring and facilitation, but roster availability remained inconsistent due to injuries and Kyrie Irving's limited participation under New York's vaccine mandate rules. Brooklyn's championship window, once seen as immediate, began narrowing faster than expected. By February 2022, reports emerged that Harden had grown uncertain about the franchise's direction and availability of its core pieces. On February 10, 2022, he requested a trade from the Nets, marking the second time in less than 13 months that he had initiated a departure from a contending roster. The trade sent Harden to the Philadelphia 76ers in exchange for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and draft assets, pairing him with Joel Embiid in a new Eastern Conference contender. In Philadelphia, the initial expectation was stability, a pick-and-roll partnership between two elite offensive players designed to maximize half-court efficiency. Harden's early impact reflected that structure, as he averaged 21 points and 10.5 assists per game in the remainder of the 2021 to 2022 season, helping the 76ers finish with a 51-31 record. However, the underlying tension that had defined his Brooklyn exit reappeared in Philadelphia the following season. The 2022 to 2023 campaign became less about performance and more about organizational alignment. Harden publicly expressed frustration with contract negotiations and long-term direction, while Philadelphia attempted to maintain contention around Joel Embiid's MVP-level production. The situation escalated in the 2023 offseason when Harden opted into his player option and then immediately requested a trade, signaling another breakdown in the relationship with a franchise within a short competitive window. The friction reached its peak in the summer of 2023 when Harden, during a promotional event in China, publicly referred to 76ers president of basketball operations Daryl Morey as a liar and stated he would never again play for an organization associated with him. The NBA later fined Harden $100,000 for public comments detrimental to league relations, reinforcing the seriousness with which the league treated public disputes involving front office leadership. The comment marked one of the most openly adversarial player-executive breakdowns in recent NBA history, particularly given Morey's prior role in Houston during Harden's MVP years. By October 2023, Harden was traded again, this time to the Los Angeles Clippers. But this turbulence was nothing compared to this next bit. 13 restaurant legal troubles. By the early 2020s, James Harden's career was no longer defined solely by what happened inside NBA arenas. While he was still performing at an elite level on the court, the off-court narrative ran on a parallel track shaped by business exposure, legal filings, and ownership risk. At the center of that shift was 13, a high-profile Houston restaurant that opened in 2021, named after his jersey number and positioned as a luxury dining concept closely tied to his personal brand. The restaurant opened in Houston's Upper Kirby district at 1911 Westheimer Road. From the outset, 13 carried expectations beyond a standard restaurant launch. It was marketed heavily around Harden's identity, drawing attention not only from local diners, but also from national media tracking athlete-owned businesses. In its early months, it functioned as a visible extension of Harden's off-court portfolio, coinciding with his move into a new competitive chapter with the Brooklyn Nets. After the January 13, 2021, blockbuster four-team trade that ended his 8-year tenure in Houston. Within a relatively short period after opening, however, operational stability began to come under scrutiny through a series of legal and financial disputes that emerged in public records and local reporting. One of the earliest recurring issues involved lease and rent obligations tied to the property. Court filings and landlord-tenant disputes referenced contested or allegedly unpaid lease payments, with some reports estimating disputes totaling around $2.2 million over time. As those financial disputes developed, additional legal pressure emerged from labor-related claims. Former employees and contractors raised allegations involving wage practices, overtime compensation, and workplace conditions. In one widely reported case, a former chef alleged unpaid wages and described operational issues that included staffing inefficiencies and sanitation-related concerns. Some filings and claims referenced maintenance problems and unsanitary conditions within the restaurant environment. While these allegations were contested, and not all resulted in final judgments, they contributed to an increasingly complex legal profile surrounding the business. The controversy widened further when 13 was indirectly connected to a wrongful death lawsuit tied to a fatal drunk driving incident involving a customer. The patron, it was claimed, had been overserved alcohol at the establishment prior to a crash that resulted in a death. Under Texas dram shop liability principles, such cases focus on whether alcohol service contributed to intoxication beyond legal limits. Harden was not publicly alleged to have managed daily restaurant operations, staffing decisions, or compliance processes. However, his ownership stake and branding association ensured that every legal filing involving 13 was amplified in the public domain. Legally, ownership does not automatically equate to direct liability for employee conduct or customer incidents. But in media framing, that distinction often collapses into a single narrative centered on responsibility. 13 reflects a broader trend seen in celebrity-backed hospitality ventures, where initial visibility and brand strength were followed by operational pressure under real-world market conditions. But things actually got worse from here on. 2025 Mansion Lawsuit Controversy. James Harden's off-court narrative then took another legal turn, this time centered not on basketball decisions or team dynamics, but on an incident tied to his Houston residence. In June 2025, a civil lawsuit was filed in Harris County, Texas, by Marissa Watley, a Houston-based real estate agent. The case named James Harden, his nephew Justice Armani Blackburn, multiple unnamed security personnel, and a security company as defendants. Importantly, it was not a criminal case. Instead, it was a civil negligence lawsuit seeking damages, built around claims of inadequate security and failure of duty of care during a private New Year's Eve event at Harden's Houston mansion. The incident described in the filing dated back to December 31, 2024. According to the complaint, Watley and two friends were out in Houston for New Year's Eve and later became aware of an after-party at Harden's residence. They ultimately arrived at the mansion, where security personnel reportedly checked identification at the gate before allowing entry. The filing described the gathering as a large, loosely controlled private party taking place across different areas of the property, with guests moving between rooms and designated sections inside the home. Once inside, the lawsuit alleged that Harden's nephew, Justice Armani Blackburn, interacted with Watley and her friends and offered them drinks. The complaint stated that after consuming a small amount, Watley began experiencing confusion and memory loss, later described in the filing as periods of fading consciousness. The lawsuit did not allege that Harden personally provided any substances or directly interacted with the plaintiff during this time. A key turning point in the case centered on what happened when Watley was separated from her friends. According to the filing, she was taken to another area of the mansion while her friends were removed from the property by security staff. The complaint alleged that the friends were prevented from re-entering the residence even after repeatedly informing security that Watley was still inside. They reportedly attempted to contact her by phone and retrieve her, but were unable to gain access, and her phone was later recovered outside the property. The lawsuit further alleged that during this period of separation, Watley was assaulted by Justice Armani Blackburn. This part of the allegation formed the criminal component of the broader civil case, although Blackburn himself was the primary individual accused of the assault in the filing, not James Harden. Harden's involvement in the case was based on ownership and alleged responsibility for the environment in which the incident occurred. The lawsuit argued that the security structure at the mansion failed to adequately protect guests, particularly those who were allegedly intoxicated or incapacitated. It claimed that security personnel did not properly intervene when concerns were raised, misidentified individuals during attempts to locate Watley, and refused entry to her friends despite warnings that she was missing inside the property. The core of the case rested on negligence and duty of care. The plaintiff's argument was that as the property owner hosting a large private event, Harden had a responsibility to ensure reasonable safety measures were in place, including adequate supervision, controlled access, and responsive security protocols. The filing also raised questions of vicarious liability, suggesting that Harden could be held responsible for the actions or failures of the security personnel operating under his authority. As the case moved into civil proceedings, it quickly became part of a broader public narrative surrounding Harden, largely because of his high-profile status in the NBA. Even though he was not accused of committing the assault, the association of his name with the property and the event ensured that the lawsuit received widespread media attention. Now, we come to the current legal trouble. arrested for possession of an illegal firearm. On June 13, 2026, in the early hours before sunrise, James Harden's car was stopped by the police. This led to the discovery of a handgun inside the vehicle, not secured in a holster, but placed in plain view. Harden, 36, was taken into custody and booked shortly after the stop. The charge was classified as a misdemeanor under Texas law, meaning it did not immediately imply long-term incarceration or a career-ending legal outcome. Within hours, he was released on bond, set at a relatively modest amount consistent with non-violent firearm possession cases in the state. A court appearance has been scheduled for June 22, 2026. No conviction was entered, and no sentencing has occurred at that point. But what about the endless rumors of sentencing? Well, the timing itself matters. Harden is not in the early, less scrutinized phase of his career. He is a former MVP, a multiple-time scoring champion, and a player whose career has already been extensively documented across Houston, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and beyond. As a result, any legal issue involving him carries immediate amplification. Within hours, headlines framed the arrest as a potential turning point, even though the legal process had only just begun. What intensified the narrative was not only the arrest itself, but the accumulated context surrounding it. Harden's career had never been defined solely by on-court production. In January 2021, Harden forced a trade out of the Houston Rockets after 8 seasons with the franchise. Reports from that period described escalating internal tension during training camp and a clear desire for relocation. Houston ultimately traded him in a 4-team deal to the Brooklyn Nets. Then, by February 2022, after just over a season with the Nets, Harden again requested a trade. He was then traded to the Philadelphia 76ers in a package centered around Ben Simmons. The move renewed expectations of contention, but also reinforced a pattern of short tenure across consecutive franchises. In Philadelphia, that pattern eventually escalated into one of the most public disputes of his career. During the 2023 offseason, Harden publicly criticized Sixers president of basketball operations, Daryl Morey, calling him a liar in comments that resulted in a $100,000 NBA fine. Outside basketball, Harden's name also became tied to business and legal controversies. His Houston restaurant venture, 13, which opened in 2021, later became the subject of multiple disputes. Then there was the 2025 civil lawsuit connected to a New Year's Eve incident at his Houston mansion, alleging negligence following an assault involving his nephew. When the 2026 firearm arrest occurred, it did not emerge in isolation. It arrived at the intersection of a long athletic career, prior legal exposure, and years of public scrutiny surrounding both professional decisions and off-court associations. Legally, it remained a pending misdemeanor case with no conviction or sentencing. Perceptually, however, it was quickly absorbed into an existing narrative framework already shaped by earlier controversies. Over time, those earlier events had not disappeared. They had accumulated. Thus, the rumors. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.